All right, so Argentina, huh? You guys really want to know how this Milei guy, like an anarcho-capitalist of all things, became president there, right?
Yeah, it's a pretty wild story.
So that's what we're going to do today. Like a whole century of their economy booms and busts, and now this like crazy ideological shift.
Yeah, Argentina is really fascinating. It's like they
Mm.
have all this potential, but they keep getting tripped up.
And it's not like they haven't had their moments of glory. Early 1900s, they were like an economic powerhouse.
Right.
Like tons of European immigrants coming in. They were a huge agricultural exporter.
Exactly. For a time, they were one of the fastest growing economies in the world.
So what happened? When did things start to fall apart?
Well, the Great Depression in 1929 really hit them hard.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
They were so dependent on exports.
Right. When global demand for their agricultural products plummeted, their whole economy went into a tailspin. And that created a lot of instability and opened the door for new political ideas.
Like Peronism.
Exactly.
Now, for anyone listening who might not be totally familiar with Peronism, can you give us the quick rundown?
Sure. So it's this unique blend of socialism, nationalism, and protectionism that has really shaped Argentina for decades.
It's become almost synonymous with Argentina, right? But it's more than just a label, though, right?
Yeah.
What did Peronism actually mean in practice?
Well, Juan Perón, the guy who started it all, he nationalized a lot of industries thinking it would make Argentina more self-sufficient. He empowered unions, which led to a really strong labor movement, and he made social welfare programs a central part of the system.
So the goal was to create a more equitable society.
Exactly. He wanted to protect workers and industries and create a safety net for those in need.
On the surface, that sounds like a good plan, but we all know that Argentina's economy has been anything but stable in recent times.
Right.
So did Peronism work, or was it actually part of the problem?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It's complicated.
Peronism had some real successes, particularly in the early years. But over time, that heavy state intervention and the very thing that was meant to protect industries and workers, it started to create inefficiencies.
I see.
Domestic industries shielded from competition. They weren't as productive or innovative. They kind of became reliant on government support.
So it was almost like a crutch that eventually became a weakness.
Precisely.
And that brings us up to the 21st century, where Argentina is facing some pretty serious economic challenges.
Right.
Like we're talking crazy inflation, over 250% in 2024, rising poverty.
Yeah.
And it seems like they're constantly in and out of recession.
It's a bleak picture for sure.
It's like they're stuck on this economic roller coaster and they can't get off.
A very bumpy ride.
And even when they did see some GDP growth, wasn't it mostly fueled by unsustainable government spending? Like they were just kind of papering over the cracks instead of fixing the foundation?
You got it. That reliance on government spending to stimulate growth, it created a system that wasn't sustainable. It's like building a house on sand. Eventually, it's going to collapse.
And then, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and that just threw everything even further out of whack.
Yeah, the pandemic really exposed all those underlying vulnerabilities.
But here's what I don't get. Through all of this turmoil, the Peronist Party managed to stay in power for decades, even with all the internal divisions, like with the Kirchnerists.
It is a bit of a paradox, isn't it? Despite all the economic struggles, a lot of Argentinians remained loyal to the ideas of Peronism, the idea of social justice, a strong state that looks after its people. Those ideas still hold a lot of sway.
But obviously something had to change. Enter Javier Milei.
Ah, yes, Milei, the game changer. And that dependence on the state. That's what Milei wants to completely dismantle.
Yeah, he's an anarcho-capitalist, right? I mean, that's about as far away from Peronism as you can get.
Yeah, it's a pretty radical ideology. He basically believes in privatizing almost everything, even things like the police and the courts.
Whoa, okay, so no government at all? Pretty much.
That's the idea.
So how did someone with such extreme views get elected in a country that's so used to government intervention?
Well, I think people were just fed up. You know, they'd been struggling for so long, and they felt like the traditional politicians weren't doing anything to help.
You were looking for something different, anything different.
Exactly. And Milei came along with this simple message, like, get the government out of the way and let the free market solve everything.
Sounds good in theory, but how does that actually work in practice? What are some of his specific economic proposals?
Well, one of his big things is slashing government spending.
Okay, makes sense. He wants to shrink the government, right?
Right. He also wants to deregulate a lot of industries and privatize a lot of state-owned companies.
So basically the opposite of what Perón did.
Pretty much. For example, he's talked about eliminating energy subsidies.
Which have been keeping energy prices low for a lot of people, right?
Yeah. So that would be a big shock to the system.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of risk involved with Milei's approach.
Definitely. There's a lot of uncertainty about what will happen if he actually implements all of his ideas.
I mean, some people think he's going to save Argentina, that he's the only one who can fix the economy.
Right. But others are worried that his policies will just make things worse, especially for the poor and the middle class.
It's like a gamble, you know? Will the potential benefits outweigh the risks?
Exactly. And it's not just an economic gamble, it's a social gamble too.
Because you're talking about completely changing the way society functions.
Argentina is a country that's used to a certain level of government support. Milei wants to take that away, and it's not clear how people will adapt.
It's like this giant social experiment.
With very high stakes.
You know, it's interesting. It's almost like we're back at that turning point when Peronism first emerged. Only now the pendulum is swinging in the opposite direction.
That's a great point. It's like this constant back and forth between state intervention and free markets.
This time it feels like the swing is even more extreme.
Yeah, Milei is proposing some truly radical changes.
And the whole world is watching to see what happens.
It's a pivotal moment in Argentina's history.
I mean, it's a head spinner, right? You've got this deep-seated belief in the state's role, and then Milei comes along and says, nope, get rid of it.
It really highlights how economics is about more than just numbers.
Exactly. It's about people's lives, you know?
It's about choices and the very real impact those choices have.
Okay, so let's recap what we've learned today about Argentina. We started way back at the beginning of the 20th century when they were like this economic shining star, tons of growth driven by immigration and agriculture.
Right. And then boom, 1929, the Great Depression hits.
Exposing just how fragile that whole system was.
And from those ashes rose Peronism, a totally new approach, a powerful state intervening to protect its people.
Which for a while seemed to work. But then those very interventions, the things that were supposed to help, ended up creating a whole new set of problems.
Inflation, poverty, recession, you name it.
And that brings us to today with Javier Milei, this like radical outsider promising to shake things up.
A complete 180 from Peronism.
Less government, more free market.
Yeah.
That's the Milei plan in a nutshell.
And it's a risky plan.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So we've laid out the history, the arguments for and against Milei's approach, the potential consequences. Now it's up to you guys listening to decide what you think.
Right. Will this be Argentina's moment?
Will they finally break free from this economic roller coaster ride? Or is Milei just going to make things worse?
It's a question that only time can answer.
But it's a question worth asking because Argentina's story is a reminder that these economic experiments, they have real-world consequences for millions of people.
And what happens in Argentina could have ripple effects across the globe.
So yeah, keep watching, folks. It's going to be interesting. That's for sure.
Well, that's our deep dive into Argentina's wild ride. Thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.